Section D of the Great Divide Trail between Field, British Columbia and Saskatchewan River Crossing, Alberta was the most technically challenging section of the GDT that I've attempted so far. Many of the streams at this early point in the year were at or near flood stage, and then there was the Howes River, which was a completely other matter entirely. I decided to take the Kinewetak alternate out of Field this year as a higher, more scenic, and less bushy alternative than the main GDT route out of Field. Starting off in Field, I had the highest ascent of the entire trip, 1,415 meters with a pack stuffed with 6 days worth of food. One of the most interesting things about the day was that the trail forms the western boundary of the Burgess Shale, a UNESCO World Heritage Site and a fossil bed from the Cambrian that has few equivalents worldwide. This fossil bed is off limits to all non-researchers, but nature has a way of working around a lot of human regulations. Because the trail was below most of the fossil bed, a lot of the shale containing fossils slid downhill onto the trail, allowing me to look at a few of the fossils without having proper accreditation to go inside. At the end of the day, Yoho Lake was an interesting campground filled with holiday makers and even some families with small children who had hiked in. Definitely not the place for quiet, but that would come in due time. I was enjoying the hike up and out of Little Yoho Lake, and about an hour in, I realized that my sandals were missing. I'd left them behind at the picnic table to dry. I went back down the trail, and 5 kilometers on 150 meters of vertical later, I was back at my backpack and able to continue up the trail for the afternoon. As I climbed further, I passed by the ominously named Ice Line Summit. There was a little bit of snow there, but not much to worry about. By mid-afternoon, I came across this amazing lake that changed color from navy to cerulean to aqua blue as the lighting and the wind affected the surface of the lake. It was quite amazing seeing this lake change color over the course of literally seconds. From there, it was downhill to the Little Yoho campground, a beautiful campground with the river rushing by. The next day was an early 7 a.m. start because I had 2 things to accomplish that day. The first was Kinewetak Pass, and the second was Kinewetak Gap, something that I had been dreading for years. The ascent to Kinewetak Pass was uneventful, but the backside was a different story entirely. Coming down, I spied this beautiful green verdant valley in the distance at the bottom of the pass, and it seemed to recede like a mirage. The part of the problem was that there was no sense of scale in the Alpine because there were no trees to judge by, and you couldn't really tell how far or how large things were in the distance. I made the mistake of not following the GPS track hawkishly, and I was soon on a make-your-own adventure going through scree slopes, rocks as sharp as knives, and boulders the size of houses. I finally reached the valley bottom, and then after only a few meters, it was straight back up the side of a glacially oversteepened valley. When I got to the gap, snow appeared to extend all the way across the gap. There was no way to get down. I'm at the top of Kinewetak Gap. This is what I've been worried about for, well, a year and a half now. I climbed up a short distance on Kinewetak Mountain to assess the situation better, and from there I could see that on the left there was just a lip of snow, and on the right there was a cornice which was unstable and wouldn't be good to walk on. Below there's a shelf extending the entire width of the snow from one side of Kinewetak Gap to the other. Returning to the gap, I had a look over the lip where it was safe to stand at the shelf below. Fortunately, there's somebody else who's been up here, so I'm going to see if I can find his or her footprints for some guide as to what's the best way to go. I followed the hoof prints to the left, and I noticed a small gap between the mountain to the left and the start of the snow. It was only about 1 meter wide, but the hoof prints went down through this small gap and then went on to the lip. Well, I figured if a mountain goat could do this, so could Goat Boy. So I went down through this gap, pirouetted onto the shelf using my hiking pole as a pivot, and then dug my poles in to traverse the shelf. Well, I made it. I'm on solid ground again. You can see the road I took here behind me. Luckily there was this bit of a ledge below the lip there. I have rarely been this scared so many times in my life. So coming down the gap was a scree slope. After several hours of bushwhacking, I eventually rejoined the Great Divide Trail main route and was able to get as far as Tributary Ford that night. July 1st was my introduction to fords. First was Tributary Ford, which was about knee-deep and ice cold. Not too bad for a start. But then, after about an hour, was the first of 4 crossings of the Amiskwi River, which was close to flood stage. That was more about hip deep. And as I went up the Amiskwi River, the trail was flooded in places or very spongy. And so I had 4 crossings of this river before lunchtime. Quite the way to get an introduction to crossing rivers without bridges. Coming down from Amiskwi Pass, I encountered the remains of the Amiskwi fire. This was the fire last year that had forced me to abandon my through-hike attempt of the Great Divide Trail. And to my amazement, somebody had gone through, cleared all the blowdowns with a chainsaw, and regraded the trail in places so that it was probably better than it was before the fire. To whoever did this, I'm forever in your debt. I didn't even get dirty going through this maybe 2-kilometer section of burned forest. My original plan had been to continue on the GDT main route, cross the Blaeberry River, and then continue on to the Cairns Creek campground. However, some intel in the Far Out app indicated that the Collie Creek alternate had been rehabilitated. I figured that for the risk, the nearly 10 kilometers worth of savings was worth it. What I didn't anticipate is coming down the steep slope of the Collie Creek alternate and hearing Collie Creek absolutely roaring. Crossing the river would have been suicidal. Fortunately, my GDTA membership paid off, and as I came to the mouth of Collie Creek, I found a bridge across the chasm through which the river was raging. I wasn't the only one to make use of this bridge. There was a bare footprint on the abutment of the bridge, so clearly humans were not the only ones benefiting. For the most part, other than the encroaching willows, the 1.8 kilometers to the Blaeberry campsite was easy to follow, and this put me on schedule for the next day. The Far Out app mentioned that a new bridge had been constructed at the end of the Collie Creek alternate in June 2024. However, there was a note that this was not for the faint of heart. In comparison with the Collie Creek crossing, the Blaeberry River Bridge was mild. 3 large logs had been ratchet strapped together with several dozen heavy-duty ratchet straps, making for a pretty solid bridge. Compliments to the engineer. That morning was spent climbing to the top of Howes Pass, where this tardiest explorer crossed paths with David Thompson and all the rest. 218 years and a few days after his historic crossing. Strangely, I had this urge to listen to Stan Rogers' Northwest Passage on the way down for some reason. As I approached the Howes River, things looked really auspicious. So I'm walking on the Howes floodplain. As you can see, there aren't many obstacles. The Howes River was at bank full stage and on the verge of flooding. In one case, the main route led to an eroding face, against which the main channel was now eating away, leaving no trail and nowhere to go but straight up. I was crossing over stacked deadfall, interspersed with foot-deep moss. It's 8:47 p.m. I just tried to bushwhack over this hill here. I finally got back on something resembling a trail thanks to the moose and deer and was able to make my way to the campsite. It wasn't much of a campsite, basically a flat area and some logs to sit on. As I was getting my tent set up, the wind picked up and it was threatening to storm, and then the wind died down, leaving me with a pleasant evening. When I went to get water at the river, I realized that the water level was only a few centimeters below the bank. Although my campsite was removed from the river by several hundred meters horizontally, it was only a few centimeters vertically above the area, and it was completely flat other than that. So I had to review my options for what happened if the river flooded overnight. I would essentially be trapped on a little island and would have to wade to higher ground and the alternate GDT route. Aside from this potential issue, I really enjoyed the remoteness of the campsite. There was nobody around, no lights, and it was completely quiet all night long. The next day, I had an exhausting 12 kilometers of detective work, route finding, and backtracking before I was able to pick up a better trail leading towards Saskatchewan River crossing. Oh, I feel like I'm in hell. It just never ends. Crossing the Mistaya River and its deeply incised gorge should have been the highlight of that afternoon. However, I was so tired that I really couldn't give it much attention. Fortunately, this is a roadside attraction and it's easy to get to. There were lots of people there, and those were the first people I had seen in 3.5 days. Then I had a few hours of fast travel along a good trail to Boundary Cut Line campsite east of Saskatchewan River crossing. July 4th, I made my way to the crossing resort to pick up my resupply package, have a meal, and do some laundry. I had a $12.50 hot dog, which was worth every penny, considering the fat, protein, and salt content were all desperately needed. On the way back to the campsite, I saw the one and only bear of the entire trip. A black bear on the side of the road of all places. So if this year's shakedown hike to Mount Assiniboine was a lesson on how to handle snow, this section was a lesson on how to handle water. The next morning, after getting my supplies organized, it was on to a new adventure heading up the headwaters of Owen Creek on Section E of the Great Divide Trail. Woohoo! There we go. A little more masculine. All right. Have a great day.